email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today's guest is someone who has redefined how we think about growth, leadership, and transformation. Whitney Johnson is the CEO and co-founder of Disruption Advisors, a world-class leadership development firm that works with Fortune 500 companies like Kraft Heinz, Morgan Stanley, and Amazon to build high-performing teams. She was ranked among the top 10 management thinkers worldwide by Thinkers 50 in 2021 and was recently honored with the 2025 ATD Talent Development Thought Leader Award. She's an award-winning author, keynote speaker, and executive coach who has spent her career helping leaders and organizations harness the power of growth. Her latest book, Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company, was a Wall Street Journal bestseller and offers a practical framework for navigating the S-curve of learning, a model that helps us understand how individuals and teams develop, innovate, and thrive. Wall Street to the boardroom, Whitney has seen firsthand what it takes to embrace disruption, lead to new S-curves, and create environments where people and organizations flourish. Whitney, it's an honor to have you here today. Welcome to the conversation.
Clint, I am delighted to be in conversation with you.
So I like to think of all of my guests as superheroes, and in your book, those I guess are metamorphs. You say the metamorphs are the superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. So what's yours? How'd you get here today?
Besides how I woke up today, you mean like
What
life? How did I get here
What
today?
led you on this journey to yes?
Okay. What led me on this journey? Well, let's see. I grew up in San Jose, California. But was born in Madrid, Spain. So I've always thought of myself as Spanish, even though I'm not. But it figures, sort of into my story. Studied music in college, and then went to Brigham Young University. Graduated. Actually, went and lived in Latin America as a missionary for a year and a half when I was 21. So again, the Spanish piece. But then I got married. Graduated, moved with my husband to New York City. And that's where things started to get very interesting. So here he was getting his PhD at Columbia. I'm a music major. I am a female. I still am. I have very little confidence, and I need to put food on the table because my husband is in school. So I get the only job that I actually can get, which is as a secretary. And I was working on Wall Street for a stockbroker, 1345 Avenue of the Americas, which is on 6th Avenue, right next to the Hilton Hotel. And I would go to work every day and have this experience of filling orders for the stockbrokers that I worked with. But I had this bullpen across from me where there were some young up-and-coming masters of the universe, is probably the best way to describe it, trying to open up brokerage accounts. And at that point in time, we didn't do E-Trade. They would call people and say, hey, do you want to open up an account and buy this stock? I remember they wanted to get people to buy WMX, Waste Management. And so in this sort of hard sell kind of fraternity type environment, they would say things like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that this is a great stock pick. Throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And at first I was really offended by that because I was a cheerleader in high school. But then I really had this moment, this epiphany of, wait a second, my husband's getting a PhD and this is going to take a really long time. And I'm responsible for putting food on the table. And I could make X or I could make 10X. And when am I going to throw down my pom-poms? And when am I going to get in the game? And so I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics. I had a boss who believed in me, and that gave me an opportunity to move from being a secretary to investment banking. And if you know financial services at all, if you ever saw Working Girl, which is a very old film at this point, you would know that was basically my story, is I was able to move into that professional track. And I would not have known to call it this then, but that was really the beginning of me disrupting myself in terms of what I thought was possible. I had this vague notion of I'll graduate from college, again, music. I didn't really have a plan of what I was going to do with music. It was sort of the 18th, 19th century liberal arts idea. And yet I started to think, wait, I could do something different. I could be something different. And so I disrupted my mindset, my sense of what was possible. And that allowed me to go from banking and eventually became an equity research analyst and was award-winning and had the wonderful privilege, and I can talk more about this if it's helpful, to connect with Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School and co-found the Disruptive Innovation Fund with him. But then along the way, I had this another aha that I was actually a lot more interested in the momentum of people than I was of stocks. And so I found myself increasingly focused on that. And so in 2012, I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review called Disrupt Yourself, and really applying the theory of disruptive innovation that Clayton Christensen's so well known for in The Innovator's Dilemma to people, and that your company can't disrupt unless your people do. And so over the last 12 years, I've written books on this topic and built the business into what I have today, of really having the privilege of working with organizations, helping them go from A to B by implementing this framework of personal disruption.
I think you mentioned in the book that you actually use that HBR article as a premise to start kind of seed the book, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was so exciting because, here I am working with Clayton and doing the investing, but also having this opportunity to get to see him speaking and sharing his ideas and really getting steeped in disruption. But then again, having that aha, and partly from my own experience, because I had been working on Wall Street. I had read The Innovator's Dilemma. I had gone to my manager and said, hey, I think I want to do something different. I want to not be an equity analyst anymore. And they looked at me and they said, we like you right where you are. They didn't say exactly that, but pretty close. And I thought to myself, in fact, I can even remember where on the page I was reading The Innovator's Dilemma, and I realized if I don't disrupt myself and take control of my life, I'm never going to do whatever it is I think I was meant to do on this planet. Again, you have this vague notion. And that was when I made the decision to leave Wall Street, become an entrepreneur, but then eventually connected with Clayton about 2 years later and then got to work with him.
So for those that are unfamiliar, what is the S-curve of learning and why do you find it so powerful?
Oh, I love the S-curve. So some of you are going to be familiar with it. It's sometimes referred to as an adoption curve or a change curve. It was popularized by Everett Rogers back in the 1960s, and he used it to understand how do groups change over time. We were using it at the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Clayton to understand how quickly an innovation would be adopted. But then I had this aha, and you're going to sense this pattern, right? Because I was applying the theory of disruption to individuals. I thought, wait a second, I think that the S-curve can help us understand what growth looks like for an individual, and perhaps more importantly, what it feels like. And so very, very simply, I think of it in three parts. There's the launch point, there's the sweet spot, and there's mastery. And what happens is that every time you start something new, so start a new job, start a new project, start a new hobby, even start a relationship, you're at the launch point of that S-curve, and your brain is running this predictive model of what is it going to take for me to go from the bottom of that curve to the top of that curve. And at the bottom of the curve, as you're running this predictive model, most of your predictions are inaccurate. So dopamine, the chemical messenger of delight, it de-delights, it drops. So you're thrilled that you're doing this new thing, but you're also having this experience of, this feels overwhelming and a little bit scary. And I thought it was a good idea to take this job, but now I'm not so sure. And you may even feel like an imposter. And so at the launch point, the growth feels very slow, even though mathematically it's at its fastest when you're at the launch point, but it's not apparent. So it feels like a slog. So that's the first part of that curve, that launch point. But once you understand that you're going to have all those feelings when you're doing new things, you can go, I'm uncomfortable. I'm supposed to feel uncomfortable, situation normal. So that's the launch point. But then you put in the effort, you tip into that sweet spot that Malcolm Gladwell popularized. This is a steep, sleek back of the curve. Now your predictive model, it's increasingly accurate. And so you have these dopamine spikes. You have these emotional upside surprises. It feels exhilarating. You feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And growth in the sweet spot is fast and it feels fast. So that's the middle part of the curve. Then the third part of the curve, which is a very interesting place, because now you're on the top, you're what I call mastery. And mastery doesn't necessarily mean you're the world's foremost expert in chess. It just means you did what you came to do. I wanted to learn 5 songs on the ukulele. I wanted to go to 20 countries globally, and you did. But here's what happens here. Because your model, your predictive model is now working, it's debugged, you're getting a little bit of dopamine, but not a lot. And our brains need dopamine. So now you have a dilemma because on the one hand, you really like being on top of that S curve, master of all you survey, you're an expert, everybody comes to you. But on the other hand, your brain needs more dopamine. And so you have this experience of, if I stay here, I will stop growing and I will start dying. This plateau that I'm on will become a precipice. You understand instinctively, intuitively that learning is the oxygen of human growth, that there's more for you to do on the planet. And so you make the decision to jump to a new S curve. Now, here's what I will tell you. Sometimes you don't make that decision because you're a chicken. But if that happens, do you know what happens? The universe gives you a nudge and it pushes you off that curve, or it pushes you back down the curve, because growth is our default setting. So that's the curve. Slow and then fast and slow. And it's a very simple model to help you understand what growth looks like and what it feels like. And it can help you navigate the emotional terrain of doing anything new.
I think that just answered my next question, which is, why do you believe growth is not just optional, but essential for leaders and teams? And it sounds like it's because it's the oxygen. And if you don't do anything, you're going to push it off anyway.
Yes. In fact, Clint, it's so interesting. I've never done a study on this and I never will, but I'll just keep hypothesizing and keep collecting anecdotal evidence. I actually have this hypothesis. Many people have lost a job or laid off at one point or another, including myself. And I have this hypothesis that you lose a job because you knew that it was time for you to do something new. Like you could feel it. It was time for you to do something new, or it wasn't the right job for you. And you didn't quite have the gumption and the ability to jump. And so the universe gave you that nudge and it tipped you and it disrupted you for you so that you could disrupt yourself and move on with your life.
I like that. So I can just be lazy and life will push me where I need to go. Just kidding.
Well, there's a little bit of that.
So how can I recognize where I'm at or where my team is at on their individual curves?
Okay, let's start with you. And then that'll allow you to think through your team. So a couple of markers that you can use. Number one is you can start with time, right? So if you're using the 10,000 hour rule, I mean to say rule. So you're probably going to go launch point somewhere between 0 and maybe 12 months. Sweet spot, if you're working 40 hours a week, sweet spot, maybe 1.5 to 3 years, and then mastery get to, after 3 years. Now that assumes that nothing has changed, right? No major new projects, not a new manager, not a new role. So that's a good marker. The way you also are going to know from an emotional standpoint is launch pointers are going to have the experience of feeling overwhelmed and frustrated and feeling like they can't ask for help, and sometimes getting performative because they want everybody to think they know what they're doing as opposed to being in this place of learning. And just that feeling of you go home from work and you're like, I don't know if I should have done this. And this is the place where when you're having dinner with a friend, they'll talk about the angst that they're experiencing of their new job. So launch point's pretty easy to tell. Sweet spot's also easy to tell, except for you miss it. Because this is the place, because everything is working, our brain isn't like, there's nothing out of sync because it's hard, but it's not too hard. And it's easy, but not too easy. So when you go to dinner with your friends, they don't necessarily talk about the sweet spot because they're like, work is great. Let's talk about something else. Mastery is an interesting place. And one of the ways that you know mastery, again, time and role is a first indicator. If you find yourself starting to feel less motivated than you were, if you find yourself starting to dial it in, if you find yourself saying, that's not how we do it here, if you find yourself saying, I feel like there's more for me to do, and even though functionally I'm getting paid what I need to get paid, but emotionally I feel like this isn't doing the job for me anymore, it's probably time for you to do something new. Now, that's for you internally. And when we look at our S curve, we always talk about the internal experience. It's like the perceived rate of exertion. But here's where the challenge comes in. I might think I'm in mastery, ready to do something new. And you, my manager, are like, Whitney, you are doing a great job. You're in the sweet spot. So now we've got to disconnect because you're saying I'm in the sweet spot and there's still some more things I need to do before I get to mastery and it's time for me to do something new. And I'm saying, no, I'm in mastery. It's time for me to do something new. Now, a couple of things here. You can use this S curve as a really good artifact to have that conversation with your team. You say you're in mastery, tell me why you're in mastery. What 3 S curves are you on that, your portfolio that makes up this curve? And tell me why you feel like you're in mastery on each one of these. Then I can talk you through what I'm seeing and see if we can come to a meeting of the minds. And I promise you that when you do get to mastery, I'll give you a new opportunity. But here's the important clincher piece of this. Because emotions are the data that predict behavior. If I tell you I'm in mastery and you think I'm in the sweet spot and I'm a high performer and you don't want to lose me and you know that the emotions are going to predict the behavior, what's going to determine my behavior? Where I think I am or where you, my manager, think I am?
Where you think you are.
Yeah. So as a manager, it's really important to not only know where you are, but also to understand, yes, I've got a good sense of where my people are, but you need to know where they think they are.
That's tough. Yeah. Because then if there's more for them to go, but they're probably going to leave. So you have to let them start the new S curve even you don't want them to.
Yeah. Or have that conversation or rebalance the portfolio. So if you think about with your team, so I remember a few years ago, I was coaching someone at a large CPG company, and she was absolutely at the top of the S curve. So she was in the treasury function, and they needed her to stay in that role. Like they needed her. So they said, okay, we're going to have you keep doing part of this job because we need you as an org. But we're going to rebalance or load balance your portfolio and give you an opportunity where you've got some launch points in your portfolio. So we're going to move you to another part of the org, take on some new roles so that overall her portfolio stayed in the sweet spot. And because they did that, she ended up staying in that organization probably 2 years longer than she might have otherwise had they not been willing to rebalance that portfolio.
You mentioned the portfolio concept a couple of times, and I think I heard the number 3 in one of those. Is that the number of S curves you would have at any one point in time, or can it be 6? Should it only be 2? I mean, is there a limit?
Yeah, there is a limit. Okay. So here's how I'm triangulating to what I think the right number is, or the optimal number is. If you look at project management, which I think you know something about.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. What's the optimal number of projects, Clint?
Just like you're going to say, it depends. Depends on the size of the project, the complexity. Yeah.
But in general, 3 to 4?
3 or 4, yeah.
3 to 4. Okay. You also know in our brains, we can, from a neuroscience perspective, we can only hold like 3 or 4 ideas sort of at the same time.
Right.
So the optimal number is to say, and using a standard bell curve distribution as well, to say you probably want to have 3 major curves at any given time, 2 where you're in the sweet spot, 1 at the launch point, 1 in mastery. So what might that look like? We can take it from a life perspective right now, because that's sometimes interesting to do, is to say to yourself, okay, so I want to have a couple where I feel like I know what I'm doing. But if you are in a situation where, for example, you've been in the same job for 10 years, no new boss, you've lived in the same town for 10 years, you've never moved anywhere for 10 years, you are probably over-indexed at the top of that curve. And as a consequence, what did we say earlier? Learning is the oxygen of human growth. You're probably stagnating as a human being and probably as an employee at the same time. By the same token, if you've just gotten married, you've just started a new job, you've just had a baby, you've just moved to a new town, that's a lot of launch points. And so what you're trying to do is say, okay, I want to feel like I know what I'm doing at work, and I feel like I am really comfortable in the house and the city that I live in. Great, now I can get married. Or great, now I can have a baby. So you allows you to think about continually rebalancing. And if you feel off kilter, you know why. You probably have too many launch points. And if you're feeling this sense of ennui of like, wow, life is not very interesting right now, work isn't very interesting right now, it's probably because you have too many mastery places in your portfolio. And again, mastery does not mean you're the world's foremost expert. It's I did what I came to do here, whatever that is.
One of the things I enjoy about your book was all the stories you tell. I love stories. And a couple that I want to chat about right now. One was how you use Mike Rowe as an example of the explorer. So we talked about what the explorer phase kind of is part of the launch phase. Yeah. But what is explorer exactly, and why was Mike such a good example of that?
Yeah. Okay. So the explorer phase is, so what I did is I broke down the S curve into 6 different pieces. So the launch point had the explorer and the collector. So the explorer phase is you're on a brand new S curve, and maybe you chose to be on this S curve, and maybe you were kipped onto this new S curve. And so you've got this time where if you think about being on this desert island, you have to decide, do I want to stay here, or am I going to be, I started to think of Gilligan's Island. Sorry. So a little bit of a brain jump. Okay. Do I want to stay here, or does this curve make sense for me, or do I need to go somewhere else? And so, in fact, I'm going to pull out the book because I don't remember all the things off my top of my head. So the questions that you can ask yourself, and then I'll talk about micro in just a second. When you're at the launch point of a curve and saying, does this curve make sense? Do I want to stay here or not? You can ask yourself questions like, do I think that this is achievable? Whatever this is, this role, this project, etc. And when I say, do you think it's achievable? I mean, do you believe that you can believe that it's achievable? Which I think is really important, because sometimes self-limiting beliefs kick in, but do you believe that you could get to the point where you believe that you can do it? Number 2, is it easy to test? So are there ways that you can get lots of feedback in this particular curve to figure out, is the product market fit there, for example? Number 3 is it familiar yet novel? So meaning, I was just in Australia recently, and I thought part of the reason why I like Australia so much is that there's a lot of familiarity. They speak English, but there's just enough novelty, right? It's a different part of the world. They speak differently. There's a different accent. There's a different sort of piece of it. So it's exciting to be in Australia. Does it fit my identity of who I want to be? So it may not be my identity right now. And I talked a little bit like religion. Like if you're going to change religions, that's a big identity shift. Is that something you want to do? Is that a price that you're willing to pay for that? Which goes to, is the reward worth the cost? And does it align with my values? And finally, is this aligning with my why? Now, micro.
I love
Why
this
is he so? He is such a fascinating guy. If you haven't already, go listen to the podcast interview that I did with him. So here's a guy, Dirty Jobs. For those of your listeners who are not familiar, he is a guy who started out in high school. He wanted to be an actor. He had job after job after job after job. And the reason he's such a great example of an explorer is most people don't like to start new things. They like to start new things and they get really competent at them and then do something new. Well, his training was, he was an actor, he was an opera singer, and Dirty Jobs, every single episode, he was doing something new. He was cleaning sewers. He was slaughtering pigs. All those jobs that none of us want to do. I will tell you, this is a bit of a digression. After listening to him, interviewing him, reading his book, my respect for the trades was transformed because of his work. Yeah. Anyway, example of an explorer is he has made a career out of being at the launch point of the curve. He's very good at it. He likes it. He models it for us, which probably means that he will live a very, very full life because he's never going to get stale.
That's true. And I think I remember reading that he early on, he was part of Deadly Catch, and then he just became the narrator instead of going on the boat over and over again.
He was a part of Deadly Catch. Yeah. In fact, and you're just reminding me. So one other thing I will tell, actually, let me just look this up really fast. Oh, and he wanted to be a carpenter like his grandfather.
Yeah.
And his grandfather was like, you're not good at this. Like, you're not good. You need to do something else.
Way to go, Grandpa. Be honest.
Yeah. So he was an on-air apprentice to pig farmers, roadkill cleaners, hot tar roofers, sewer inspectors, all in service of the question, what would the world look like if no one did this job? And anyway, he's just fascinating guy. Here's the thing I would also say for all of your listeners and for you and for me, because I need to remind myself of this every day. One of the reasons one thing that can happen to us as we get older is we can insulate ourselves from ever doing anything new. We can insulate ourselves from ever navigating any launch points. We really can. And so one of the things that, whereas when you're young, you get very good at navigating launch points because you're forced to, because you're continually disrupted. The difference for us as we get older is we have to use our agency and our autonomy to require ourselves to navigate new things so that we don't lose that muscle.
Right. You talk about that in the book where the kids are children are just like that. They're constantly learning and failing and learning and failing. And as adults, we kind of tend to avoid the failure if we can.
Mm-hmm.
Another story you told in this section was about, I'm going to probably butcher the name and I apologize to this person in advance, but Marco Tricorca.
Marco Tricocci. Marco Tricocci.
Okay.
Like,
right,
remember the singer Jim Croce?
Yeah.
So it's
okay.
Tricocci.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was CIO at the time of the Four Seasons, and his first boss there was then CFO John Davison.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically a point to all the leaders out there: do this instead of what you normally would do.
Yeah.
And when he first got hired on, what most leaders would probably do is say, hit the ground running. I want to get everything as fast as possible. But instead, his boss did something quite different.
Yeah. Oh, I like
his
how you're
boss
setting that.
Said,
are you going to you share? You go.
He just basically said, I want you to take your time, meet the people, get to know the people, and then create a plan of what you need to go do, which is just such a gift.
Right. And because of that, so he was there, I think, well over a decade. I think he was there closer to 14 years. He's now at Sunrise living in Washington, D.C., but he was there for 14 years and he did this massive, massive IT transformation. And if you think about why that was possible, obviously he had the technical skills, but that foundation that his boss asked him and required him to lay is he helped him make sure he had relationships with all of the stakeholders. So that's part of being at the launch point of a curve, is build relationships with all of your stakeholders so that when you ask them to do that thing called change that no one wants to do, you have the moral authority and the relationship, the relational context to make it feel safe enough that they want to change and they're willing to change, and they can and you can understand how to talk to them about the change so that it feels like something that they actually want to do.
Yeah, that was just such a gift because most bosses are the opposite. They say, get it done. You're already behind schedule and just hit the ground running, And so it was a really nice, refreshing approach that he took. The term that you mentioned in the book that I also found interesting was premature cognitive commitment. So just in case you don't, have to memorize the book, it's basically a tendency to cling to familiar assumptions even when new facts come to light.
Yeah.
And as I was reading about that, I thought that kind of, not that I want to get into politics, but it certainly it explains how the two camps can be so different. No matter what news comes in, they see it from their perspective and they don't change their minds.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, there are different ways to refer to that. There also can be, confirmation bias or anchoring bias of and it was fascinating to build on that. I remember a few years ago, and I think it might've been after I'd written this book, interviewing Annie Duke, who who's a poker player. She was an award-winning poker player. And she talked about how we all talk about how we hear something and then we decide if we're going to believe it or not, but that's actually not how it works. We hear something and then we believe it, and then we have to decide what we're going to do with it. And so it's part of the reason why the, ages of 0 to 3 are so powerful, because everything you hear, you believe. It could be complete bunk, a complete lie, but you believe it anyway. And so we're between that and then this idea of confirmation bias and premature cognitive commitment. It is very, very difficult for us to disagree with what we already believe.
Because then we would have been wrong.
We would be wrong. Allowable. And you know why we don't like being wrong? You know why we don't like being wrong, right?
No, please tell me.
We're addicted to being right. We are addicted to being right. And here's why. So this is research from Judith Glaser. So every time you argue with someone and win, your brain floods with dopamine and adrenaline. You're like, I am the victor. I am so smart. And so if you argue with someone and win, then the next time you disagree with someone, what are you going to do? You're going to argue so you can win again because you can get dopamine. And so we are addicted to being right. It feels terrible for us to be wrong.
Well, that concludes part 1 of my conversation with Whitney Johnson, co-founder and CEO of Disruption Advisors, best-selling author of Smart Growth, and one of the top management speakers in the world. Coming up in part 2, Whitney explains why it's so hard for us as humans to receive negative feedback.
I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, our brain needs to scan for threats, right? And so when we hear something that is negative, that's a threat to our identity. There's also really interesting work that had been done by a professor at West Point at one point. I think it was called The Psychology of Combat. And basically what he said, he described it, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that whenever someone gives us feedback or attacks us, it's actually, it's like we're being emotionally killed dead. Like it is very, very difficult for us as human beings.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.